We're back with the analysis and history of every Happy Tree Friends character. While I do recommend watching the previous video in the series, it is not required. There's really no reason to pad this out, so let's begin with our first character of the day, Handy the Beaver. Where Toothy is an exaggeration of beavers having big teeth, Handy is an exaggeration of beavers building dams. This is quite obvious, as Handy is a carpenter, wearing a hard hat and a tool belt. He also very clearly has no hands, but we'll get to that soon enough. One part of his design that isn't entirely consistent is his ears, or sometimes his lack thereof. In several episodes, Handy is visibly shown to have no ears under his hard hat. However, this isn't consistent, and some materials do show him with ears. Most likely, I think he is intended to have them, but because you'd normally never see them for more than a couple frames, it's just not worth the time to add them, especially as the show goes on and the budget decreases. As for design history, there's basically nothing to see for Handy. From what I can tell, there are no publicly known concept sketches for him besides this one incredibly crude drawing that might not even be him. It seems that his design and concept were just figured out so quick that he didn't really need any fine-tuning. With his design out of the way, now we can talk about Handy's debut, being the second episode of the series, Housewarming. The episode follows Handy as he presents Petunia with a brand new treehouse, only for it to randomly burst into flames. It's a simple premise, but it demonstrates Handy and his use in the show very well. Handy doesn't have hands, and how much that affects him is dialed up and down for comedic effect. He can build this elaborate treehouse all on his own with no problem, but literally seconds later he can't pick up a fire hose. He's able to operate a helicopter and fly it all the way over to a lake, but then he can't push a single button. As you may have noticed, this is typically tuned to whether or not the camera can see him. If he's off screen, he can do amazing things despite his lack of hands, but when he's on screen, his lack of hands only makes things worse. As for why he's missing both his hands, it's never explained, and any plans to show a reason were scrapped. One of the show's longest running gags is Handy attempting to do something that requires hands, failing, and then scowling at the screen. This is by far the most iconic thing about Handy, to the point that it's all over external material like merchandise and advertising. In the TV season, they translated this into Handy just being a bit of a grump. He's not mean or anything, he's just kind of generally done with the world being so unfair to him, and I think it really suits him, honestly. Despite his hardships, the other characters are generally very friendly with him and appreciate the work that he does, whether it be car repair, emergency services, or even domestic stuff like babysitting. Though, funnily enough, despite him being a beaver, he's never actually built a dam. According to the crew, Handy is one of the hardest characters to write for, probably the hardest to write behind Crow Marmot. It seems that this is mostly due to the fact that because Handy has no hands, it can be difficult to make him move a story along in a way that's both funny and clear to the audience. This is very easy to see by the fact that Handy really doesn't have that many starring roles, especially later in the series. He only has 2 starring roles in the TV series, in which one of them is more of an ensemble cast that isn't focused on him. Post-TV, he only has 3 starring roles and very little screen time outside of those roles. Similar to Toothy, he seems to be the perfect balance of being difficult to write for, but not quite popular enough to make it really worth it. In another similarity to Toothy, Handy is also voiced by Warren Graff, and while predictably this does mean they sound pretty similar, they do have distinct voices if you listen carefully. Don't believe me? Listen to the man himself.
But like Toothy is kind of like a higher pitch one where he's like and Handy is like more gravelly, like
Previously, I've talked about the rumor that Ken Navarro once voiced Toothy in the episode Keepin' It Real. While I couldn't find a source for that specifically, I can verify that Ken actually voiced Handy. In the episode A Whole Lotta Love, Warren wasn't available and Ken recorded the lines, though for whatever reason, they were never replaced, and these lines made it into the final episode as is. The only other noteworthy thing about Handy's voice is that on the Third Strike DVD, there's a bonus feature which shows the recording process for Shard at Work, with Warren gargling and choking on water to match the visuals of the episode. Apparently in doing this, it very nearly ruined the sound equipment. Some sources even say it flat out broke the equipment, though it's hard to say for sure. Another thing I've mentioned before is that in the early days of the show, the voices were pitched up in editing, and you can see this with Handy in an interesting way, where it was seemingly done to compensate for the fact that Warren really wasn't even doing a voice. If you listen to some of his lines in Housewarming, you can tell that his lines are pitched up, but some of them are clearly just Warren's normal voice. I think it's safe to say that this was just a result of the show being brand new, and thus Warren just wasn't used to doing the voice yet. These same lines were later reused for Toothy in Kringle Carol, but because this was made later in the show's life, they weren't even pitched up this time and you can hear them as is. Outside the show, Handy's been fairly well utilized, mainly because it's very easy to see who he is just from his design. He makes frequent appearances in the brand overall, and this is also true in the games. He's playable in the Crack Pet Show, Deadeye Derby, and Run and Bun. Though similar to Cuddles, he is not present in False Alarm, and unused graphics are all that remain of his inclusion. In an earlier version of the game, we can see that alongside Lumpy and Flippy, Handy was meant to be a fully playable character, complete with a seemingly finished 3D model. Though sadly, this one screenshot is all we have of the model, and from what I can tell, there isn't much info about this stage of the game's development. Though I guess it would explain why Handy is so prominent on the cover art, despite him not being in the final game at all. Also, on that note, why are his eyes so small? They fixed it in the art book, so I really have no idea. In the merch scene, Handy did fairly well. His frustrated pose especially was used for all kinds of things like shirts, wallpapers, sweatbands, and even his one official plush. He even got an NFT. Gross. In terms of figures though, he's one of the unlucky 4 characters to be part of the cancelled second wave of SEG figures, which is a real shame, as from the prototype images we have, he looks amazing. He was included in the SEG keychain set, alongside a few other characters, but his full-size figure was never released. However, he did get 2 figures later on, the first one being a direct reference to the TV Volume 4 DVD, and the second one being a Trexie. Trexies were basically the closest thing to Funko Pops that Happy Tree Friends ever got, being small figures with a uniform design that adapt popular franchises. A lot of Happy Tree Friends characters got Trexie figures, and immediately you'll probably notice something important. They all have hands. So how do you adapt Handy to a design that by default has hands? Simple. You give him ghost hands. Yeah, apparently removing the hands was just too much work, so this figure literally just has see-through plastic instead. A weird solution, but hey, whatever works, right? In the polls, Handy doesn't have a lot to see. In the 2000s, he was 9th place with 4% of the votes. In the 2010s, though, he only lasted 1 round, beating Petunia and then being outvoted by Nutty. I think this is a case of poor timing for the first poll and bad placement in the second. I think overall Handy is well liked, but it took him a while to get to that point, and even then, Nutty has always been more popular. Now this is where I would talk about fun facts, if I had any. I genuinely couldn't find anything specific to Handy that wasn't better placed elsewhere, or just not that interesting. Even the wiki barely has anything interesting to say. Seriously, look at this trivia page. Handy is orange. Yeah, I'm gonna need a source for that. He's very clearly green. Handy dies a lot. Wait, death? In this show? Well, that's just completely ridiculous. That would never happen in this show. You see what I'm talking about? I think I should take this time to clarify what I'm not talking about in this series, as there are some things I choose not to mention. For one, I don't really care much about survival rates, as the show is still making new episodes. If I talked about survival rates, the info is likely to be outdated when new content releases, and for that reason, I think that info is better suited for wikis. I'm also not talking too much about what I call debatable patterns. I define this as something that could be considered a trend, but it depends on how you look at it. For example, Toothy often has eye injuries. While this is true, it's kind of hard to gauge how intentional it is. It could be that it's a callback to eye candy, or it could just be a coincidence and Toothy fit these scenes due to him fitting basically any scenario. We can't really be sure, as in that case, eye injuries are all over the series. So I don't want to present it as fact unless it's remarkably interesting or at the very least funny. Either way, Handy didn't really have anything else that fit my ruling, so let's move on. Next up is the other character introduced in Housewarming, Petunia the Skunk. Petunia, for roughly a full decade, was the only other female main character besides Giggles. And before you say anything, I'm not counting Flaky. That is an entirely different discussion. For the first few years of the series' life, Petunia was basically just a clone of Giggles, a stereotypical kids show girl character. You can see this in Housewarming, where basically her entire role is on fire, which, you know, that isn't really a personality. And it seems that this was intentional to some extent, as the only concept art of Petunia has no notes whatsoever outside of her species. Beyond that, the concept is near identical to her final design, just missing her flower. Said flower, as well as her air freshener, didn't really have any real significance until the TV season, which we will get to shortly. The only part of her design to change throughout the life of the show is the same as Giggles, being the back of her head. Early episodes show the pattern reaching all the way across her head, while it was later changed to only go a small part of the way. I know it may sound reductive for me to say that Petunia was the exact same as Giggles, but honestly I don't think it is. They are not just characters with a similar archetype, they are quite literally identical. You could swap them in any given scene and nothing would change. And it's because of this that Petunia wasn't often used pre-TV. Giggles is the primary girl, so why use Petunia when she accomplishes the literal exact same thing? Her biggest starring role pre-TV was the episode Hello Dolly, which was pretty late into season 2, and even there, she doesn't do anything that Giggles couldn't. So as you can see, Petunia was in a kind of tricky spot. She had basically no personality of her own, and thus she was incredibly hard to justify using for basically anything. This all changed in 2005, when the TV season was greenlit and the longer episodes made the writers rethink some of the characters. Lots of characters got new traits and quirks, but Petunia got the most major changes. Previously, I've mentioned these old bios for the characters that were featured on the show website and on DVDs. They were clearly written very early in the series' life, when there really wasn't a lot to go off of, so many of them say things that are not reflected in the actual show. Petunia's reads, "This sweet-smelling skunk never raises a stink. You won't have to hold your nose around this friendly creature." In addition to this, she also takes 5 showers a day. It's very likely that this bio gave the writers some inspiration, as the TV season took this and ran with it. TV season Petunia is basically a brand new character. She's still girly and friendly and all that, but they gave her one major key trait. Petunia has OCD. A very exaggerated, cartoonish version of it, but OCD nonetheless. She is obsessed with hygiene and cleanliness to the point that a slight imperfection is enough to make her panic. This trait was first shown in her most famous episode to date, Wishy Washy. This episode is one of the most unique and divisive episodes of the series due to its format and tone. Seriously, I've seen just as many people say they love this episode as other people have said that they absolutely despise it. Despite it being 7 minutes long, it only features 3 characters. This puts the focus entirely on Petunia's OCD, to the point that it's almost like a psychological horror. Petunia's panic around her plumbing issues only gets worse and worse as time goes on, to the point that it literally drives her insane. If you're wondering why I'm not showing a video for this and just using still images, it's because the episode's second half was taken down officially for violating YouTube's TOS. I don't want to risk describing or showing the ending and this video getting taken down, so here's a crowd at Comic-Con reacting to it. I think you can kinda guess what happens. Whether or not you like this episode or not, it is undeniable that it made Petunia distinct. She's a neat freak to the most comical possible level, and this personality would later appear in other TV episodes. Interestingly, this trait is oddly not present in the later TV episode Take a Hike, where Petunia drinks polluted water out of desperation, which seems kind of out of character. This was simply a result of the episode being written before her OCD was decided upon, and can reasonably be explained by her being severely dehydrated. The TV season having longer episodes was clearly a big help for Petunia's character. So what do you think happened when the TV season ended, and the episodes went back to being 3 minutes long at most? Well, they basically completely forgot that Petunia ever had OCD. This one scene from Royal Flush is the only time in post-TV where it comes up at all. And in general, she didn't really appear that often. She only has one starring role, being the episode I Nub You. It's a sweet episode about Handy and Petunia falling in love, but if Petunia and Giggles were swapped, this episode would not be any different. It's kind of a shame that Petunia started out a little bit boring, was able to fix that problem and carve out her own niche, and then went back to being boring. I guess that's what happens when you make every single episode about Lumpy. Petunia's voice is incredibly easy to cover, as it's literally the same as Giggles. She was voiced by Dana Belbin, and then later Ellen Connell, and finally Lori G. It would be a bit redundant for me to go too in-depth, as from what I can tell, there is no evidence that Giggles and Petunia were ever acted or directed differently from each other. So if you want a deeper dive into the exact details of Petunia's voice, you can just watch the segment I did for Giggles. I know it might be a little annoying to hear, "I'm not explaining this, watch something else," but I'm not kidding when I say they sound the exact same. And if you don't believe me, here's Ellen Connell.
Well, Petunia and Giggles are very similar. So they're like, la la la, la 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 la.
Outside the show, Petunia is in a very interesting spot. For a while, Petunia barely got any attention in the merch scene, with a small array of items, but nothing particularly major. That was until the late 2000s, when most of the major Japanese merch began to be produced. In Japan, the main selection of characters and merch sets was Cuddles, Giggles, Flippy, and Petunia. Yeah, for whatever reason, Japan saw her as one of the key characters, and this gave her lots of merch, most notably plushes. Cuddles and Giggles are mascots, so they make sense. Flippy is the fan favorite, so he's a no-brainer. Though Petunia? I can't really tell you why they picked her. I'm not complaining, but you'd think they'd pick somebody more popular, like Nutty or Flaky. She did get some stuff outside of Japan, like a few figures, but Japan is where most of the major stuff was made. Compared to most other characters, Petunia got a lot of attention in the games. For one, she's playable in both Dead-Eye Derby and the Crack Pet Show, but she also starred in 2 games, being the reskinned fan game Going Overboard and the original game Socks to Be You. They're not particularly exciting games, but having a starring role in one at all is something that not all characters can say. I do also want to mention that more often than not, Petunia is posed identically to Cuddles in promotional material and in the show's title cards. If you need extra proof that the writers had no idea what to do with her pre-TV, this is pretty much all you need. As for fun facts about Petunia, there's one interesting moment I want to talk about from the Season 2 episode Blind Date. Disco Bear is being creepy like usual, and this leads Petunia to spray him with something. If this were any other character, this would obviously be pepper spray, but considering it's Petunia, some people have wondered if this was supposed to be skunk spray. There's no official commentary for this episode, and the storyboards don't have any text, so whether or not it was pepper spray or skunk spray is unknown. Considering this was written before Petunia had her OCD, I'd be willing to believe either one. Despite her massive shift in character increasing her popularity, her poll results are pretty mild. In the 2000s, she got 6th place with 6% of the votes, and in the 2010s tournament, she was able to beat Chrome Marmot in round 1, as you probably would expect, but lost to Handy in the second round. I'd assume that Handy having a defined character from the get-go helped him out here, whereas it took Petunia years to find her own niche. With Petunia covered, we can discuss the next character, Splendid, or as he is sometimes known, Splendid the Flying Squirrel. I think Splendid is one of the most easily recognizable characters, in the sense that you can understand who he is just by looking at him. And I think that might be why there's not much known design history for him. The closest thing there is for Splendid is this art by Ken Navarro. Whether or not this was the first drawing of Splendid, or simply a style exploration, isn't entirely clear. One element of his final design that many people don't notice is the fact that Splendid actually has a unique body shape compared to most other characters. Specifically, his upper body is larger to emphasize him being strong. It's a neat detail, and it makes him stand out, and combined with his wings, he's a very unique character, both in design and function. And in case you couldn't already guess what his function is, Splendid is a superhero, and that much is shown in his debut. Season 1, Episode 3, Helping Helps. The episode features Giggles trying to outrun a tsunami, with Splendid swooping in to save her. He actually does manage to pick her up, but it's not long until the Happy Tree Friends twist is made clear. Splendid is a superhero, but he's not very competent. And in case the Superman references were not overt enough, there's an entire episode about him turning back time by spinning around the planet, another one about his weakness to the quote-unquote crypto nut, and another one where he works for a newspaper, complete with a disguise that's literally just putting glasses over top of his mask. And of course, this disguise works absolutely perfectly. He's basically Superman, but far less dependable. He has all the same powers: flight, heat vision, ice breath, super strength. The problem is his temper and his priorities. Splendid will often hear somebody in danger, try to help, and then either get distracted and leave, or make things worse. What distracts him is usually some household task, like baking, doing his laundry, sewing, or reading a book, and many episodes see him putting those as his highest priority. In the TV season especially, he is very irritable, and when one of his very questionable ideas doesn't work, he'll either try something even stupider, or literally just give up and leave. He even literally killed Mole for basically no reason other than he was bothering him. Something I wish they explored more about Splendid is the fact that he's often treated as an in-universe celebrity, with comics, appearances at conventions, as well as his own line of merchandise. As interesting as this is, it's really only explored to any extent in the episode Wrath of Khan, and nowhere else. Splendid is interesting, as he is incredibly dominant in the episodes that he appears in. If Splendid is in an episode, it's basically going to be all about him, with only one exception where he's a cameo. Because of how powerful he is, he's not in very many episodes, only appearing 11 times in the entire series. Furthermore, he's only died on screen one time. Because Splendid is so baked in superhero tropes, it's hard to make a story for him that isn't just an episode of a superhero show. He's just so impervious to damage that having any sort of conflict or suspense requires more setup than a typical episode. So, in the late 2000s, the crew decided out of the blue, hey, if Splendid is a superhero, why don't we give him his own superhero show? And then they just did. As part of Happy Tree Friends' official spin-off show, Kapow, Splendid received his own sub-series, Splendid's Supremely Sensational, Stupendously Spectacular Super Squad. Try saying that 5 times fast. Well, I say series, but it's really more of a pilot. Only one episode in the series was made, titled Mirror Mirror, in reference to the episode being about Splendid facing off against his evil doppelganger, Splendont. Wait, shouldn't it be Splendidn't? The episode, like the others in Kapow, never got any sort of follow-up, and due to the show's failed Kickstarter campaign, it's unlikely that we will ever see it return. As for Splendid's voice, it's a nearly identical situation to Lumpy. He was originally voiced by Rody Mondillo and was replaced by David Wynn around the start of the TV season. Because of this, the characters have always sounded very similar. There are differences between Rody and David's respective voices for Splendid, though it's kind of hard to describe, so listen for yourself. And in case you were wondering, Splendont is also voiced by David Wynn and thus sounds identical to Splendid. Due to his infrequent appearances, Splendid is very rarely used outside of the show. Until his Trexie figure in 2006, he got basically no merch. Besides some random stickers and keychains, this was all he got up until his minifigure. Unfortunately, he never got a single plush, not even a prototype. He's also only ever appeared in 2 games, being in the Crack Pet Show DLC and in Deadeye Derby as a premium character. This is likely just because he is so strong. Putting him in a game as he is in the show would just be completely overpowered. And I know some of you are gonna bring this up, so no. Splendid's First Flight and Dumb Ways to Die are not official games. Those are both fan games and way out of the scope of this video. Moving on to the fun facts about Splendid, there's a few things I want to mention, starting with how Splendid was portrayed in Season 1. In his first ever on-screen appearance, Splendid can be seen eating an acorn, something he never does at any point ever again. I assume this was maybe meant to be a trait of his, considering the fact that he is a squirrel and his house is also shaped like an acorn. In the Season 2 episode Flippin' Burgers, the menu shows a picture of an acorn, again implying that acorns are food for happy tree friends. This was likely an early idea that never resulted in anything, as the characters consistently eat human foods, with even Splendid having an entire episode about him baking bread. I also want to mention Splendid's early bio. If you need any proof that these are just jokes that were made up on the spot, look no further. Splendid is apparently afraid of heights. You know, the guy who has on several occasions flew up into space with no issue. He's afraid of heights. Are you telling me that the Happy Tree Friends crew doesn't really care about canon? No, I just don't believe that. That's not possible. Something else interesting about Splendid is that he has never interacted with Flippy. They were both in Class Act, but they didn't have major roles, and were basically only included because that episode's entire gimmick was that it had every character. Now, why do I bring up Splendid and Flippy specifically? Well, the idea of a Flippy versus Splendid episode has been a common request among fans of the show, and while this idea does have some potential, Ken Navarro has made it very clear that this specific episode will never happen. Seriously, he has said this many times.
Which brings us one step closer to Flippy versus Splendid.
No, that will never happen, by the way. Just for the record.
Wait, I just felt 1,000 people's dreams crushed in an instant, and then nothing.
In the polls, Splendid is actually quite interesting. In the 2000s, he placed 13th out of 18, with a mere 2% of the votes. It makes some sense, as at this point in the show, he only had 2 episodes. In the 2010s tournament, he notably beat out Lumpy in his first round, but then lost to Flaky, which shouldn't come as a surprise. I actually do want to talk about Splendid's reputation, as in general, I don't think he's just a character who isn't popular, but is actively unpopular. And unlike Lumpy, where he has a lot of fans to balance out the detractors, Splendid isn't often a favorite. That's not to say nobody likes him, but compared to the rest, he's definitely divisive, with some finding his incompetence and occasional malice funny, and some finding it annoying, repetitive, or overly cruel. Though say what you will about Lumpy, he's been punished several times. Splendid has only ever really been punished in Gems the Breaks, and basically nowhere else. In a show where generally most characters don't get out of an episode unscathed, having a character who almost never gets punished rubs some people the wrong way. Now there's something I've been neglecting to mention so far when it comes to polls. In 2013, there was a Happy Tree Friends in-person exhibition held in Japan. It featured things like merch and original artwork on display, but most relevantly, it had a character poll. Now, I haven't brought this up previously, as the sample size is just so small. It felt like overkill to mention this because most of the characters didn't get more than maybe a dozen votes. However, a few characters got a noticeably higher amount of votes compared to the rest, and oddly enough, Splendid was one of them. If you need further proof that Splendid is more popular in Japan, then you should take a look at the official Line stickers. If you didn't know, Line is a texting app that is very popular in Japan, with stickers based on popular IPs being a big part of it. Happy Tree Friends has received several of these. The characters they picked? Well, to start, they picked Flippy and Flaky. Obvious choices considering they're super popular. But besides them, the only character to get their own set of stickers was Splendid. Not Cuddles, not Nutty, not Giggles, Splendid. Now, I don't speak Japanese, so I can't really give you a perfect explanation as to why Japanese fans seem to like Splendid more, but it's still interesting. Overall, Splendid is a very unique character, as again, whenever he appears, he basically takes over the show. Because his episodes are so dedicated to him, and him specifically, I often kind of forget he exists. Not because I dislike him, but because he just changes up the show so much. To some people, it's a fun way to keep things feeling fresh, though to others, it's a distraction that's just too different from the typical formula. Though regardless of what you think of him, he's definitely an interesting part of the show, and important for sure. Next up is our third blue character in a row, Sniffles the Anteater. Happy Tree Friends are not smart creatures, but if you want a character who is even sort of approaching smart, you want Sniffles. While Sniffles was always meant to be smart, Sniffles being an anteater wasn't the original plan. Concept art shows Sniffles as a squirrel, which obviously didn't happen. He also used to have an inhaler, but this was cut. Talking about his final design, Sniffles is very distinct with his glasses and his long snout, and because these are unique to him, they've gone through several revisions over the course of the show. Basically, they just made it shorter and shorter as the show went on, and by the end, he kind of doesn't even really look like an anteater. I don't really know why they did this. I can't find any cited reason. Maybe it was easier to animate, maybe they wanted his mouth to be more visible, I'm not really sure. Along with his snout, he also always wears glasses, and this of course makes you wonder what he looks like without the glasses. They are brief, but there are moments where we can see this. In Season 1, he only has pupils, just like Cub. In the TV season, this was changed so that he has the same eyes as all the other characters. On to Sniffles' personality. Do I even really need to elaborate? Even if you've never seen the show before, I think you can guess what type of character he is. Sniffles is the smart guy, the nerd, the inventor, the classic stereotypical science type who can basically make whatever they want, whenever. Sniffles is basically always seen doing something relating to math, science, or some other nerdy thing like going to conventions or dressing up in Star Trek cosplay. And also growing an additional finger to do that cosplay. This is one of the only times they have 5 fingers. It's kind of weird. Sniffles is best described as a sort of reverse Lumpy. Lumpy is used very often to get stories going, as whenever the writers aren't sure how to set up or pay off something, Lumpy can just do something stupid to make it happen. Sniffles, as you can probably guess, is the opposite. When the story needs somebody competent for a job, Sniffles is almost always the #1 choice. If they need a doctor who can actually be helpful, 9 times out of 10, it's Sniffles. This ease of use is very clear to see in the TV series, as Sniffles got a lot of screen time in it. This was a noticeable step up from the pre-TV seasons, where Sniffles rarely got much screen time that wasn't with the ants. If you're wondering why I didn't mention Sniffles' debut, they are the reason why, and trust me, we will get to them. Back to Sniffles though, he's one of the most common characters to see, as his inventions are an easy way to get the plot going, and even in post-TV, he got several major roles. However, Sniffles being smart only means so much when the bar is so low. Sniffles is smart, but he often seems to get tunnel vision, completely ignoring the ramifications of his actions. He may be book smart, but he's definitely not street smart. He builds this giant, powerful drill machine, and it works perfectly. But he also doesn't realize that putting the driver's seat above the drill doesn't really make sense. His inventions will often backfire on him, and while the classic bad luck the show has is definitely part of that, some of this is just bad design. And again, when everyone else is an idiot, you being the only smart one doesn't really mean a whole lot. I kind of struggled to write this part, as Sniffles is such a simple character with very obvious traits. He's smart and he makes inventions, but they often go wrong. You've likely seen this exact archetype many times, though that's not really a bad thing. Happy Tree Friends, at its core, is a parody of old, overly cheery kids shows, and thus using their tropes and messing with them is just part of the fun. Sniffles works well as a means to an end, and is often funny or charming in his own right. Sniffles' voice is quite interesting, despite the fact that he has never been recast. Since the beginning, he's been played by Mondo senior producer Liz Stewart. This is notable, as along with Cub and technically Mime, he's the only main character whose actor is not of the same gender. Well, Flaky might be that too, but again, very different story. Despite Liz always being the voice for Sniffles, his voice has very notably changed throughout the series. In early episodes, Sniffles sounds like he has, well, the sniffles. Though later on, I guess he learned to clear his sinuses, as this trait was nowhere to be seen.
Aha! Aha!
Oddly enough, clips of Sniffles' voice were reused in the crossover episode Happy Train Friends, though not for Sniffles. They gave his voice to the Dumbways character Stumble, presumably just because it's what they had on hand. It's still kinda weird though. And as a bonus fact, Liz Stewart's name is often misspelled in some of the episode credits. It's an easy mistake to make, but still noteworthy. As for Sniffles outside the show, it is not looking good. Sniffles is the first character we've looked at so far who's part of what I call the unlucky trio. 3 characters who got no released figures or plushes. Sniffles did have some prototype merch, but it never released, and the most that I could find that did release were stickers and a keychain. If I had to guess, it's probably just that his design is kind of hard to adapt into 3D. Thankfully, his game appearances do fare a bit better. He's the first boss in Dead Eye Derby, and considering that the bosses are the best part of that game, it's nice to see him get some love. His vehicle is also based off of the drill that he built in A Whole Lotta Love, which is a neat reference. Later, he was in the Crack Pet Show DLC, making him playable for the first time. He is technically in False Alarm via the cutscenes, but he never appears in the actual game. As for random fun facts about Sniffles, I want to talk about his mouth. Technically, this could have been earlier when I talked about his design, but I didn't want to get off track. Sniffles is, well, an anteater, and thus his mouth and tongue are contained in his snout. Though in several storyboards, this is often ignored and his mouth is drawn underneath his snout, almost as if he's an elephant with a trunk. This obviously isn't part of his official design, as it doesn't really make sense. It implies that he has a separate tongue in his nose, which just kinda looks weird when you notice it. There was one time when this actually made it into the show, being this shot in Take a Hike. It was copied directly from the boards, and by the time anybody noticed it was wrong, it was way too late to fix. Speaking of confusion regarding Sniffles' species, this official advertisement for A Hard Act to Swallow calls him an aardvark. Maybe this is a stylistic thing? It says he's an anteater right there, but I mean, aardvarks and anteaters are often mixed up, so who knows? Now, I generally don't talk about theories, as this show isn't the type to ever really bother with lore, but I'd be remiss to not talk about one of the most famous ones. In the TV episode Blast from the Past, go watch it if you haven't, time travel shenanigans make Sniffles accidentally cause the events of Spin Fun Noanya. This episode has made many people believe that the entire show is actually a time loop created by Sniffles, and this episode is showing him putting the entire series into play. Is this true? Probably not. I don't think the crew really cares about that sort of thing, but it's a very common theory, and in this case, one that actually has some solid evidence. Despite his prominence, Sniffles never did very well in the polls. He was 11th place in the 2000s with only 3% of the votes, and he didn't last a single round in the tournament, losing to Russell right off the bat, even though Russell has far fewer episodes. Now, if only there was a part of Sniffles' character to blame for that lack of interest. Okay, I've put it off long enough. Let's talk about the most hated part of Happy Tree Friends. By far the least popular recurring characters in this franchise that, from what I can tell, very few people like. The ants. Their designs haven't really changed that much, and they're the same characters regardless. The ants, like Sniffles, debuted in Crazy Antics, an episode which is a perfect display of who the ants are and who they would continue to be. Sniffles stumbles upon the ants, tries to eat them, and then the ants fight back, beating up Sniffles' tongue and eventually winning in the end. That's literally all the ants are. Sniffles shows up, he tries to eat the ants, they attack him, they win, the end. That sounds really reductive, but seriously, go watch these episodes, they're all like this. Now, you might be thinking, well, the show is all about characters getting hurt, and people love Flippy who does the same thing. What makes the ants so hated when Flippy is so loved? Well, there's a few key reasons why people hate the ants. Reason number 1, they only attack Sniffles. And I mean that in 2 ways. The ants only appear in episodes to attack Sniffles and nothing more. They never interact with any other character besides Sniffles, which causes several problems. It makes their violence feel so much more torturous. In their later appearances, they dismember Sniffles for minutes on end, and while the gore is very much creative, the fact that it's only on one person makes it feel cruel in a way that's different from anything else in the show. Sure, Sniffles attacked them first, but like, forcing him to eat a razor blade apple is a bit much. And even outside of that, we know Sniffles. We see him in other episodes. And while he's not perfect, he's shown to be generally friendly and likable, and many people find his nerdiness very appealing. So when these characters, who appear nowhere else in the show, just show up and start torturing him, it doesn't really matter what Sniffles did. People side with him because they know him and feel bad for him. Not that this show should be morally upstanding or anything, but to keep things funny and not depressing, you have to mix things up. Flippy doesn't have this problem because he can do basically anything to anyone. His potential is basically limitless. The ants are so specific in their gimmick that they often come off less as funny and more as overly cruel. And this ties into reason number 2. The ants always win. Remember all that stuff I said about Splendid being divisive because he has a high survival rate? Yeah, imagine that, but pushed to the absolute limit. Outside of this one gag in Blast from the Past, the ants have never died. They've barely even gotten close to it. Even Flippy has died before, and even then, he's so entertaining and creative that most of the time, we don't care if he wins or loses. It's fun either way. Because the ants are so repetitive, always attacking the same victim who never has a fighting chance, if they're not making you shocked or upset, they're likely just making you bored, as the second they show up after their first appearance, you already know exactly what's going to happen. Now, these 2 reasons are pretty impactful, but the thing is, I don't think people really would have cared if it weren't for one episode. I don't really mind the ants' first 4 episodes. In fact, I'd say they're actually pretty good. They're excessive, and I see why people don't like them, but I think they make up for it with good animation, not being too long, and the type of sheer stupidity that the show excels at. It's basically Happy Tree Friends meets Tom and Jerry, and as a brief offshoot, I think it works. If the ants never appeared after season 2, I don't think people would hate them nearly as much. But for whatever reason, the crew decided that this setup, the one that was already starting to get tired, the one that only works in small doses, and the one that's very, very hard to make unique, deserved a TV episode. 7 minutes of this. And thus, Tongue-in-Cheek was born. This is the most hated episode of the main series. It's not even close. This is basically 2 episodes stapled together, with the second half being the main reason the episode has the reputation that it does. The ants take control of Sniffles' remote helmet, and they basically make him torture himself for the rest of the episode. It's only about a minute long, but this scene alone is what makes many people completely hate this episode. It's incredibly cruel, and it's not like Wishy-Washy, which was actively building to its climax. Happy Tree Friends can definitely be cruel. It's cruel a lot of the time. But when the main character is crying for mercy while being forced to prepare their own demise, that's a type of darkness that's gonna be divisive. It'd be one thing if the show was trying to be cynical, emotional, or scary, but it's not. Happy Tree Friends is a comedy, pure and simple, and to a lot of the fan base, this just isn't funny. And I think the crew also realized that the ants didn't have much staying power, as after Tongue-in-Cheek, the ants never appeared ever again. Despite dozens of episodes and plenty of content being released, the ants have been MIA since 2006. There has been some speculation that this was because Tongue-in-Cheek was so hated, but there's no source for this, and several official sources actively counter it. There's never been a confirmed reason as to why the ants were never used again, but if I had to guess, it's most likely that they just didn't have any new ideas for them. As for fun facts and external material, the best I have is that it's implied that there was an ant father, but he is never seen. In the storyboards for Crazy Antics, they're depicted as very realistic, though they were obviously redesigned in the final episode. And before you say anything, they have no merch whatsoever, and from what I can tell, they are basically non-existent in marketing. All that's left to talk about is their voices, which have been provided by various people in the crew. From what I could find, the ants have been played by Warren Graff, Sarah Casablanco, Jessica Teach, Misha Klein, Ken Navarro, and Ken Pontak. The role was clearly very open, as all the ants do is scream. The ants have never appeared in an official character poll, as they're not really main characters. So, to get some data, I made a poll to gauge my viewers' opinions on the ants. After about 4,200 votes, the results make it clear to me that most people are not impressed by the ants. 8% of people said they liked the ants, 14% said they did not, 23% said they despised the ants, and the remaining 55% had no strong opinion. Over half of the viewers didn't really feel strongly, and I think that checks out considering the ants are in so few episodes. That fact also makes it very notable that 37% of voters had a negative opinion. While it's not overwhelmingly negative, an 8% approval rating is pretty telling to their reputation. So, those are the ants. That was way longer than I thought it was gonna be. In the end, I find them to be one of the strangest parts of the series, one that really only could come from them being introduced so early on. They're the closest thing to a true side character the show has, as usually the show only focuses on the main cast. They're not really a main character, but they're also not really a side character. Love them or hate them, they change up the show pretty majorly. Whether or not that's a good thing, though, is up to you. And there you have it. More characters analyzed. Tune in next time for more characters, which will also shove us into the confusing world of Happy Tree Friends release dates. If you know, you know. So with all that said, see you next time.